begin reading with verse 1. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord delivered them into the hand of the Philistines 40 years. We think 4 years of a president is forever. How would you like to have had 40 years under a king who led you into bondage? 40 years they were in bondage to the Philistines. Verse 2, there was a certain man of Zorah, of the family of the Danites, whose name was Manoah, and his wife was barren and bare not. The angel of the Lord appeared unto the woman and said unto her, Behold now, thou art barren, and bearest not, but thou shalt conceive, and bear a son. Now therefore beware, I pray thee, and drink not wine, nor strong drink, nor eat not any unclean thing. In other words, your baby is going to be a Nazarite from birth. And we'll get to that a little bit later. And for lo, thou shalt conceive, and bear a son, and no razor shall come on his head, for the child shall be a Nazarite unto God from the womb. And he shall begin to deliver Israel out of the hand of the Philistines. Almost everything we know about Manoah's wife is right here in chapter 13. In all of these verses, and there's one other passage later on where Manoah is mentioned, but not his wife so much. Everything we know about her is in one short chapter. She is so unimportant in some ways that her name is not given anywhere in the Bible. History, if you can believe history, history says that her name was Aggadah, Aggadah. Now that's history, which means you got a 50-50 chance of being accurate. But that's what history says her name was, even though we can't confirm it by Scripture. At a time when women were not considered to be very important, she stands out as a bright and shining light in a dark world. My outline is very simple. First of all, her background. What do we know about her? Then we will look at the appearance of the angel, her reaction as compared to her husband's reaction. And then last, we will look at her life as a mother. And you'll see where she stands out the most. Now, in her background, we've already read, she was a woman. Some people read the Bible, and I am not one of them, but they read the Bible and think that women are worthless, useless, good for nothing. You know, women's place is in the kitchen and bearing children, and that's all that women are good for, is cooking, cleaning, and having children. But as we studied on Wednesday night, when we were looking at the biblical worldview, and we came down to gender and identity, God made Adam, God made Eve, God specifically took time very carefully and designed Eve from scratch and made her into a perfect woman to be the perfect helpmeet for Adam. We studied that in great detail. He didn't just throw a woman together and say, she's going to be garbage anyway. I'm not going to waste much time on her. No, he took the time because woman was so important that God specifically designed every part of her to be perfect and to be the perfect mate for Adam. God did not think women were tramps. God did not think women were useless. God did not think that women are to be treated like slobs or slaves. He created women like he did Adam, from scratch, designed with his own hands, molded and shaped, so that both of them would bear the image of God. And as we've said on Wednesday night, the difference between men and women is not to look down upon women, but it's simply that men and women were created for different reasons. They were created with different bodies. They were created not that one Adam's important, Eve's trash, not at all. But they were created to fill different roles. I know some men even today who think that a wife is nothing but his personal slave. Women are useless. They're dumb. They're stupid. They have no sense. Women are there simply to please the man. There are still some people that believe that. But it's not one is smarter or dumber. It's not that one is a tramp or trash to be trodden upon. God created them physically different. He created them mentally different. And I'm not going to get into the whole science of men's brains versus women's brains, but their brain is wired differently. Their brain, it doesn't function like a man's brain. And it's not that their brain's inferior, it's just different to serve a different purpose. Eve was not less important than Adam. She was just given a different position, a different role, and a different place to fill. In the Bible, it is true that very few women stand out in the Bible. Most of what you read will be men. We could begin with Abraham. Actually, we could begin with Seth, the first of the tribe of Christ. We could begin with Seth. We could come on down to Noah. We could go to Adam, and then to Isaac, and then to Jacob, and then to the 12 tribes, and most all of the judges in the book of Judges. Most of the judges except one were all men. Not because women are not important. It's just that in most cases, God gave man the responsibility of leadership and oversight and guidance. But when God does mention a lady and lifts her up, that means that she is special in a special way. Notice what about this woman? Bible said that she was barren. That means she could not have children. And I don't want to go into this, but too far. But when a couple is struggling to have children, they don't need ridicule. They don't need mockery. They don't need to be called names. But in this time in history, for a woman to be barren was considered one of the worst curses that any woman could have. She lived for children, to bear children. That was a large part of her identity as a lady or woman, was to bear children. And to a large extent, if she was not able to bear children, she was considered cursed. She was looked down upon by other women. She would be shamed and ridiculed because she could not bear children. She was doomed to a life of nobody. See, that was considered the greatest privilege. Oh, you're just a mother. You're just a housewife. There is nothing greater than a godly woman raising godly children. Don't ever let anybody put you down because you choose to spend your life having and raising godly children. But she was barren. She didn't have children to raise. She didn't have children to teach. She didn't have children to be able to instruct them and guide them. She was barren. And then part of her background, don't laugh when I say this one, she was married to Manoah. This passage and the rest of the chapter gives us a fairly good picture of Manoah. He certainly did not know much about the Bible. Now, I know they didn't have printing presses. They didn't have copiers. They didn't have all the things that we have today. In fact, the Bible, at last I heard, was still the number one selling book in the world. Now, that includes all translations. So he didn't have, all of that. I have a Bible that I keep here. It's my preaching Bible. I have one in the shop. That's my reading Bible. I've got one at home. That's my study Bible. So I've got 3 right off of the bat. He didn't have a Bible, but the law of Moses was commonly known even without the presses and all of those things. But he doesn't seem to know much about the Bible. He certainly didn't know anything about angels. Angels had appeared to Abraham. Abraham recognized them, treated them, and accepted them as messengers from God. Isaac had angels speak to him. Jacob had an angel a couple of angels speak to him. And in those cases, when the angel appeared, they recognized it as an angel and treated it with all the respect of an angel. He doesn't seem to know anything about angels. He doesn't seem to know much about God. He said, "Oh, God is going to kill us." And his wife had to be the one to speak up and say, "Honey, if God was going to kill us, he would not have sent an angel to tell us we're going to have a child." So it was his wife that had to present God to him in a way that he should have known. When the angel disappeared, his immediate thought was gloom and doom. We saw an angel vanish. We're going to die. It was gloom and doom. History, and I'm quoting here, okay? According to history, and give me a few minutes after church, I can find the website and give it to you. But history says that Manoah, and I'm quoting, was an ignoramus, which is why the angel appeared to her and not him. History says he was an ignoramus. That's a direct quote. How would you like to be married to him? Now, I hear wives sometimes, and sometimes I almost want to agree with them. My husband is a doofus. Y'all know what a doofus is? Everybody know what a doofus is? Oh, I'll look it up. It's somebody that's lacking in intelligence. I'll give you the 5-second version. My husband is a doofus. Well, you may be right, because he did marry you, so, that means he must not have been too bright, or he wouldn't have married you. I read a short clip somebody sent me. Many wives complain about their husbands. A good wife takes her husband for what he is and makes the most of it. I thought that was pretty good. None of us have a perfect mate. None of us have a perfect spouse. Once you get married, until you get married, they're perfect. But once you're married, they're not perfect anymore. And then you have to decide, am I going to be unhappy my whole life because I now realize she has flaws? Or am I going to make the best of what God has given me and go on and serve God? Whether he was an ignoramus or not, he certainly had some major flaws when it came to even being the head of the house. Notice number 2, the appearance of the angel. Now, angels often appeared in the Old Testament. That was a very frequent occurrence. Hebrews says that we don't have that today because we have something better. Peter said that the Bible is far more important, far more valuable, far more dependable than angels or visions or anything of that sort. So in the Old Testament, they didn't have the 66 books of the Bible that we have. And so angels would often appear in the Old Testament. But in most cases, when an angel appeared, it was usually to the husband or the man. It was very, very, very rare that an angel would appear unto a woman. But he did in Manoah's wife. Why did he appear unto her first? Well, I may have already given you some reasons. But the angel announced that you are going to have a son. Notice her reaction. She heard the news. She believed the messenger. And she believed the message. You don't find his wife saying, "Come on, are you kidding me? Stop playing with my emotions. Stop making fun of me for being barren." No indication of anything than immediate acceptance, immediate belief. God sent an angel. The angel delivered God's message. I believe it. No indication of doubting or anything else. The only question she asked was, "Where are you from and what is your name?" Are you pulling my leg? Are you messing with me? God said it. That settled it. But then she goes and tells her husband. And I'm sort of kind of just a teeny bit reading between the lines. But she goes and tells her husband, and it appears that his answer was something like this: "I want to hear it for myself. I'm not saying you're lying, but I'm not going to believe it until I hear it for myself." You know anybody that, and I got to be careful here. There are many, many, many people, many pastors who get extremely discouraged sometimes. Because no matter how many scriptures they read, they can read scripture, black is black. And there will always be people that say, "That's your opinion. I won't believe it unless God appears and God personally." Listen, God's told you personally right here. If God said it in His Word, you don't need to hear it from an angel. You don't need to hear it from anyone else. God had appeared to Manoah's wife. God had told her, "You're going to have a son." But Manoah said, I want to hear it myself. One of the things that, and I've talked to many preachers, some would shock you if I told you their name. Some you would know, some you would know by reputation. It's like, no matter what I preach, it seems like people just are not going to listen and believe it and practice it. That's one of the biggest things that discourages pastors. But he said, I want to hear it for myself. And so he said, Lord, if you want me to believe this, you send the angel back and let him tell me. And of course, God did it. But I want you to notice his wife here. She didn't change the message. She said, this is what God said. This is what I said. If you read it, it's almost word for word. She did not change or interpret the message to fit anybody or anything. God had given her a message, and she repeated it almost verbatim. She didn't brag about having seen an angel. What's so important about that? The Apostle Paul wrote that he had been taken up into the third heaven, saw things that he could not even speak or write about. And lest he be exalted above measure, God gave him a thorn in the flesh to keep him from becoming lifted up in pride. We don't see anything with her to keep her from being lifted up in pride. An angel appeared. An angel personally delivered a message to her. And she doesn't seem to become overcome with pride. I remember we were up in Ohio, and President Ronald Reagan, some of you young ones have no clue who he was, but he was president running for his second term as president. And a good friend of mine was very, very involved with that party at that time. And he got 2 tickets, called and said, you want to go with me? President Reagan was speaking in Dayton, Ohio. He got tickets that allowed us to go into the closest circle you could get to President Reagan. I was closer to President Reagan than I am to you right now. If that gives you any. I was closer to President Reagan than I am to you. And it's like, I was only 20 feet from the president. Woo! Man, I was excited. She had an angel appear, and it doesn't seem to have changed her at all. Doesn't seem to have changed her attitude. Doesn't seem to have changed her humility. But as she tells her husband, and I understand the context, I understand the change of definitions of words. You know, there are a couple of favorite passages in the Bible. One of them is over in Kings, when the Midianite army, 185,000 soldiers, had surrounded Israel. God sent an angel and killed every one of them that night. And I love it the way, and I know English and I know what it meant. But one of my favorite verses is the next morning when they woke up, they were all dead. How do you wake up dead? I know what it means, but I love the way it says in English. In our passage here, when the angel reappears to Manoah, in verse 12, Manoah asked the question, how shall we order the child? Now, I know English, words change. I just love the way it's phrased in our King James Bible. How do we order this child? Well, you can go on Amazon and, see what specials they've got. You can call 1-800, order me now. How do we order this child? Somehow, every time I read that, I have to stop and chuckle just a little bit. But the angel tells Manoah, this is what I told your wife. Everything is exactly the same. Manoah is hospitable. He offers to feed the angel. He offers to reward the angel after the baby is born. But when Manoah brought the food and lit the fire to heat it and eat, the angel did a strange thing. He vanished in the flames. Somehow he was in the flames and ascended back up into heaven in the flames. Manoah thought for certain God's going to kill us. Notice his pessimism here. God's going to kill us. And it was his wife who had to explain that if God was going to kill us, he would not have promised us a child. Notice it was the wife who had the greater insight. It was the wife who had the greater understanding of the workings of God. But then notice, last of all, her life as a mother. Many, I guess this was probably 50 years ago. I was pastoring over in Indiana. And I remember it well. It was Mother's Day. And God gave me a message on mothers. And I remember it because it just fell into place, which most of the time I really have to struggle. But the verse is found in 1 Timothy chapter 2 and verse 15. Paul wrote, notwithstanding, she, that is a godly mother, she shall be saved in childbearing if they continue in faith and charity and holiness with sobriety. I heard one preacher say, she will be saved by bearing an infinite number of children. She'll be saved in childbearing, and the more children she has, the more likely she'll be saved. That's got to be in the top 100 of the most stupid things I've ever heard. It's not what he's talking about at all. A mother often is not famous. She doesn't get to stand in the pulpit and preach to an auditorium of people. She doesn't get to go on TV. She doesn't get to do a lot of things. In fact, she may live her entire life and never be known outside of her immediate family and friends. In her case, we don't know her name, but we know her son, and I'll tell you who he was in just a minute. Her son became extremely famous. Her son is listed in Hebrews chapter 11, the Great Hall of Fame. Her son is listed as a great example of faith, even though we don't know her name. We don't know how old she was. We don't know what tribe she was from. And many women were and still are virtually unknown outside of their small circle. Every time I think of this, I can't help but think of my mom. My mom was born down on Yeller Creek. Somebody said, "You mean Yellow Creek?" Well, it's spelled Yellow, but if you're from down there, you better say Yeller Creek, because that's how everybody called it. She was born on Yeller Creek. Married a man from Erin, which was the biggest city within miles. Population was about, 500 or so back then. God saved her, saved my dad, put him in a sound Baptist church. But outside of church and family, very, very few people ever even knew my mom's name. Everybody knew my dad. He was known all over town, not because of anything bad, but his reputation was extremely good. But very few people knew my mom's name. But because of her godly example in raising two sons, Mom's outreach extended around the world. They moved a lot when we were young. They ended up living in, again, don't look for this on a map. They ended up living in Cumberland Heights. But from Cumberland Heights, Mom's outreach, her influence, went all the way to South Korea, Peru, Mexico, and all over the world through my brother being a missionary. She is known from California to Texas to Virginia, West Virginia, through God's using me in our printing outreach. If you were to ask 1,000 people on our mailing list, do you know Wilbert Ellis's mom's name? I dare say not one of them would know her name. But her influence has spread all over the country. And because of her godly example in raising two sons, only God knows how many people have been saved. from a lady that was born on Yeller Creek. And if you don't know where Yeller Creek is, don't waste your time looking for it. I don't think it's ever been on a map anywhere. Poorer than dirt. And yet her influence has been used of God. She raised her son exactly according to the instructions God had given her through the angel. He was to be a Nazarite from birth, which means there are things other kids can do. You can't because you're a Nazarite. He grew up with some of the strictest rules and regulations of any Jew because he was a Nazarite. If you've ever raised children, you know what it's like. Son, don't touch that. Son, put that down. Son, I said, don't do that. Son, stop. Son, you can't do that. But everybody's doing it. You're not everybody, and I want you to name everybody that's doing it. Raising a Nazarite from birth, man, she had her hands full. As an adult, a Nazarite vow was usually for a very short term of time. It could be a month, it could be a week. In the Bible, when an adult took a Nazarite vow, it always had a time limit. Not in this boy's case. She had to raise him from infancy till he became an adult under the strictest rules that were possible. When he became an adult, he didn't always live like he should have lived. He did some things that I'm certain broke his mom's heart. He did some things that were immoral and unrighteous. And I'm sure she shed many a tear. He was killed at a young age because of his sin. But he had enough godly influence that in spite of all of his failures, he is still, by faith, he did this and that. How many of you know who his son was already? Several. For those that don't, her son grew up and his name was Samson. Yes, he made some major mistakes, created some acts of immorality. But what good there was about him, I believe, was the result of his mom's upbringing. I close with one final verse. 2 Timothy chapter 1. Paul is writing to young Timothy. And he said in verse 5, when I call to remembrance the unfeigned faith that is in thee, which dwelt first in thy grandmother Lois and thy mother Eunice, and I am persuaded that in thee also. What's missing in that verse? You may not get it because it isn't there. So you may not figure it out. Neither his dad nor his granddad are mentioned. But his mother and his grandmother are. And the faith in young Timothy is directly accredited to his mother and his grandmother, and their teaching of him in his young, formative years. Ladies, you may not think that you're doing much. You may not think that you're important. Oh, everybody knows my husband. Nobody knows me. But if you raise your children in the nurture and admonition of God, if you succeed in transferring your faith to your children, Lois and Eunice are preserved in Holy Scripture forever because of their influence and their raising of young Timothy. Parents, and now that I are one, grandparents, never underestimate your influence on your grandchildren. Oh, they think I'm an old fogey. They may, and you may be. They may never tell you what they've learned under you. They may never thank you for being a godly grandparent. But I guarantee you, you raise them according to God's word, set a godly example, and God knows, God sees, and isn't that the one we're supposed to please after all? Spending time, talking to them, walking with them, and pointing out, see that flower? See that rose? God created that rose. What you think is a waste of time very well may have an eternal influence on your children and your grandchildren. Ladies, don't sell yourself short. Don't ever let Satan tell you you're not important. My dad worked 3 jobs my entire life, sometimes working 4. So much of our, especially during the week, so much of our teaching was from Mom. Dad made sure we were in church. Dad set the example, reading his Bible, studying his Bible. But it was Mom who gave us that day by day by day example and those little lessons that she probably thought we weren't paying attention. But I still remember many of those things because of a God